Kael Fenrir pushed open the door to the Silver Elk Tavern, letting a gust of damp air follow him inside. His boots left muddy imprints on the worn wooden floor as he strode to the bar, a faint clinking sound coming from the burlap sack slung over his shoulder. The tavern was alive with chatter and the smell of roasted meat, but as Kael leaned casually against the bar, all noise seemed to fade. He dropped the sack onto the counter with a solid thud. The barkeep eyed him warily. "What's your game, Fenrir?" Kael smirked. "Game? No games, just business." With a theatrical flourish, he untied the sack and pulled it open, revealing the faint golden glow of a shard of crystal. Gasps rippled through the room. "Is that?" someone stammered. Kael nodded, letting the suspense build. "A piece of the Emberheart," he confirmed. "Yes, the same legendary artifact, and no, I won't say how I got it." The tavern erupted into murmurs. Kael's smirk widened as he enjoyed the attention, but the air grew heavier, not from fear, but from something else entirely. The door creaked open again, and a chill swept through the room. The murmurs died instantly as all eyes turned to the figure standing in the doorway. She was cloaked in deep green, the fabric catching the dim light as if it shimmered. Beneath her hood, silver hair glinted like starlight, framing a face that was both striking and severe. Her eyes, green like the forest canopy, swept the room before locking on to Kael. "Lyria," someone whispered, the name spreading like wildfire. Kael straightened, his smirk faltering. Royalty was trouble he didn't need. And this wasn't just any royalty. Princess Lyria, long presumed dead, stood before him, alive and far more intimidating than the tales suggested. "You," she said, her voice steady as steel, "will help me reclaim the Emberheart's power. Eldralis depends on it." Kael opened his mouth to protest, but Lyria raised a hand. A faint green light swirled around her fingers. She wasn't asking. Kael leaned back against the bar, crossing his arms. "Reclaim the Emberheart? Bold of you to assume I'm handing it over." Lyria stepped closer, the green glow around her hand intensifying. "This isn't about you, thief. The Thornwood grows stronger every day. If the curse consumes Eldralis, what will you steal then? Ashes?" "Bit dramatic," Kael muttered, though the seriousness in her gaze unsettled him. He glanced at the shard in his hand. It pulsed faintly, almost as if it recognized her. Lyria's voice softened, but only slightly. "You're no fool, Kael Fenrir. The Emberheart chose you to find it, but if you don't help me, its power will mean nothing." Kael sighed theatrically. "Fine, but only because I'm feeling generous." The faintest flicker of a smile touched Lyria's lips. "You'll find I don't forget loyalty." Kael smirked, though he couldn't shake the feeling he'd just signed away more than he realized. The sun was barely rising when Kael and Lyria left the village, their footsteps crunching along the dirt road. Kael squinted at the distant horizon, where the silhouette of the Thornwood loomed like a dark promise. "This is a terrible idea," he muttered, shifting the burlap sack on his shoulder. Lyria walked ahead, her cloak billowing slightly in the crisp morning breeze. "You agreed to come?" "Yeah, and I already regret it." Lyria didn't respond, her focus entirely on the path ahead. Kael glanced at her, noting how the morning light caught in her silver hair. "So, Princess," he said casually, "you always this cheerful, or am I just lucky?" Lyria finally looked back, a flicker of amusement in her gaze. "You'll need that sense of humor where we're going." The Thornwood was unlike anything Kael had seen. The trees twisted unnaturally, their bark dark and cracked, oozing crimson sap that glowed faintly. A thick mist clung to the ground, and strange fungi pulsed with an otherworldly light. Kael hesitated at the forest's edge. Are we sure we can't go around? Lyria ignored him, stepping forward with purpose. The vines seemed to recoil slightly as she approached, her presence unsettling the cursed forest. Kael sighed and followed, muttering, "This is how people die in stories, you know." They hadn't gone far when the forest began to move. Roots crept across the ground, thorny vines slithering toward them like snakes. Kael froze, his hand darting to his dagger. Lyria raised her hand, and a green light burst forth, forcing the vines back. "Stay close," she commanded. "Wasn't planning to wander off," Kael muttered, gripping the Emberheart shard tightly. The forest whispered, voices just out of reach, and Kael realized their journey had only begun.